Okay, so I want to do a video about the Enneagram types, to do all of them, just one by one, because I think that sometimes if you do a short video, you get a sense for grasping the types quickly. Because, it's easier said than done to type yourself, and not everybody has it. Not everybody's typed themselves necessarily, decisively, whether the core type or the trifixes. And that's why I think it's a good idea to do another video. It's just a matter of getting down these basics. So start with 1. I'm going to talk about, for each type, I'm going to talk about the passion and also what the childhood is like, because that's when the type forms. On the surface, people can look kind of similar. People can struggle to go by the surface traits, because in adulthood, they get to adulthood and they go, who am I? Which one of these really am I? The surface traits can be very similar compared to tell them apart. So starting with 1, this is wrath, anger, resentment. And to give you a sense for the flavor of this, this is somebody who, when they were a kid, felt everything had to be perfect. They had to be good. Everything had to be just right. Everything had to be done well, to a high standard. And there was this sense of being criticized. And so when they don't reach that, there's an anger. And they carry around a kind of a tightness. And it's not an explosive wrath normally, but you can just feel the anger. There's an undercurrent of it, and they have very high standards usually. And ones usually can identify themselves pretty easily. So, but again, goes back to childhood. They felt that they weren't good enough, and nothing was ever good enough. And sometimes there's the need to perfect themselves and their world, and not only that themselves, but what's around them as well. Okay. All right. Second type, number 2, is pride. And this is also flattery, sometimes identified with flattery, but pride is the sin. And in childhood, these are people who felt that they had to offer something to others. They had to have something to give. Otherwise, they wouldn't be loved. Okay, so often there's childhood experience of needing to be there just for other people and not necessarily being taken care of themselves. And other people sort of being the focal point, and that they were only seen in terms of what they could do for other people. There's often the need also, similar to the 1, of needing to be good. It's because you have to help people. You can't be doing bad things. So there was a high standard there as well. And you get that in adulthood. They develop pride about that. That really they do have something to offer. And, if it's not acknowledged, then they have pride, feeling like, a sense of entitlement, and also a sense of being proud of themselves for this selflessness that they have and their ability to do things for others, and a service orientation with the type 2. Okay. All right, next is 3. 3 is vainglory, vanity, deceit. Vain means hollow. Vanity is hollowness, hollow glory, deception. And so it's deception of the self, deception of other people. And, the 3s often felt when they were young that they were putting on a show. There was something performative about their experience. When they were growing up, there was this sense that they had to perform in order to get recognition and attention and love. And they came to identify themselves as part of a kind of a fake performance, that's very much focused on appearances and, a charade in some ways, that they end up feeling that it's hollow because it doesn't reflect a genuine value beneath that. It's a kind of a performance. And they develop a vanity about it where that they focus just on that, and that becomes the dominant reality, and then they deceive themselves and others through that. Okay, next type is type 4. Type 4, we have envy, sometimes also melancholy or sadness. And, here's somebody that felt that they were never good enough. Not in the same way as the 1, but in a way that others were, right? That other people had something that they didn't have. And they wanted it. And they couldn't have it. There's this sense of not being good enough and having something wrong with them, just on a basic level, that they couldn't figure out why it was this way, and other people really seemed to be on a different level from them, kind of another world. They were isolated, and often that they did withdraw and felt like they had their own kind of inner tragic world they lived in, and filled with fantasies and so forth, and sadness, and these tragic, dramatic experiences, emotions. And they were envious towards others, that they can't have it, and they felt sadness about it. There's a kind of sense of tragic romance there, and they can have a romantic attitude even in youth. There's a strong romanticism. Okay, and all right, next type is 5. 5 is avarice, or greed, or hoarding, withholding, stinginess. This was somebody who held themselves back and became observers, detached to observe. Basically saw the world outside of them, and instead of getting involved, they sort of watched it happen and became very fascinated by it, and kind of got stuck in this mode, in the observer mode, and got in the habit of holding on to their energy and not getting involved, and not contributing, not being a part of the group or the world, and formed a detachment between themselves and the world. Often developed kind of an internal world that was its own, object of avarice that they held on to that was theirs. Okay, next type is 6. 6 is fear, cowardice. Can also be identified with doubt and uncertainty, but compensatory, can be a courage and an overcoming of fear. But often they were scared of what the world was going to do to them and what was coming, and worried about the other shoe dropping, and what's going to happen next, and what's that going to be like, and all this anxiety about how I'm going to deal with that. And they came up with ways to combat that, and it just seems like to the 6, they would become sometimes paralyzed. One step over from the 5 withdraws, but the 6 would often become paralyzed with fear, and they can become irrational as well. They can jump to extremes. They can become daredevils and say, well, I'm just gonna do it, I'm just gonna jump in there, man. And then they go and they're skydiving, and they're crazy going the other way. So look for that axis. People get excited about the 6 because they can go both ways. And they're they're very much manipulated and controlled by their fear. Next type is 7. 7 is gluttony. Also, you have things like ego planning and, kind of a positivity, escapism, running away from pain and so forth, and just kind of idealism, looking at the world and, oh my gosh, look at all that great stuff, and I want that. I want to experience those things. They were kind of the first eager person to get in line and go on the roller coasters, to get excited and kind of to enjoy life to the fullest. But in a positive way. It was about, I want more of that, and often they can be ambitious and push themselves harder and, harder than they really should go, often to go after more things. The glutton, goes beyond their capacity to eat and to consume. And there's just so many things to do and so much fun to be had, and often, quite sociable and active people. And as a child, there was this kind of going out and living life to the fullest and just having the most fun and the most fascinating, great experiences. And then that gluttony is that insatiable, just kind of, they're never satisfied. And, they're up late at night then, and they're watching movies at 2 or 3 a.m. and they're, taking drugs or something. And it's just like, it's never enough, Okay. Next type is 8. 8 is a lust. And, also sometimes excess. There's an excess similar to gluttony, but an excessiveness or an intensity about the 8. And, an intense desire. This is somebody who wants things, wants to go after something, and just has to have it. It's about the intensity of the desire. And, the willingness to push through obstacles to get it. And, I would do anything for that, and I must have that, and that's mine. And, a little bit like the gluttony of the 7, but there's a different tone to it. It's more aggressive, and, it's comparable to sexuality, and has a different kind of sensuality to it, and gravitas, seriousness about it, and also a rebelliousness to it. That it's transgressive. And they want to do bad things often. It's not just what they want, but it's to rebel. And, when they're children, often there's this feeling that you can't have that. That people are trying to control you, and that someone might abuse you, or somebody might stop you and get in your way, that other people might overpower you. And often there's a sense of that life isn't fair for the 8 when they were young, and they had to deal with that they focus on justice and getting what's theirs, and evening the score and righting the wrongs. And that's really what you're looking at with the 8. And they overcame that. They have a focus on vengeance. So even from a young age, they were about getting people back and getting even. If you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back because somebody hurt them. So that's the way they get even with the world. All right, and last type is type 9. 9 is sloth, indolence, acedia, sometimes called kind of a lack of caring, a listlessness, and there's a laziness about life in general, about their emotions, about getting worked up about things, about motivation, and they can be complacent, and they just want things to be easy. They don't want to have to work. They don't want to have to push themselves. It's just kind of, they just want to settle into life, and they can withdraw into themselves. They can go with the flow. They just kind of stay on the bus. they miss their stop, but they don't say anything, so they just keep riding and riding. And they often don't assert themselves against the grain very well. And, you know, as children, often they felt abandoned, really, on some level. That people weren't paying attention to them, and they were just kind of left hanging there. So they end up, just kind of sitting, waiting for someone to notice them often. And this is withdrawn quality that they have. So they end up thinking, well, okay, nobody's going to do anything, and this isn't so bad. You know, it's kind of like they learn where that gets them, and people don't pay attention, so they don't worry about it. And they go looking, you know, they go looking for something outside of themselves to give them a sense of purpose. And often they look to others, and there's an internal laziness about their values and who they are and their passions. They can be followers. And, you know, they sort of very go with the flow kind of experience for these types of people. Low conflict, good mediators, and peaceful people. Okay, so that's all of them, and I did my best to talk about briefly the sin and the passion, and adulthood, and also a little bit about what the childhood is like, childhood experience, and hopefully that can help people to type themselves in a flash, and to type other people too. If you want me to talk more about it, you can ask me, and I can fill you in, give you some thoughts. Okay, thanks. Talk to you later.